Welcome, everyone, to this explainer on the fundamental analysis of commodities. If you're the kind of person who loves discovering the hidden gears that actually run our global economy, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to unpack the massive unseen forces that drive global markets, and I promise you, we're going to make these giant concepts completely accessible. Seriously, think about this for a second. What actually controls the price of your morning coffee? Or, that tank of gas you just bought? It's not just arbitrary numbers flickering on a screen. Every single time you make a purchase, you're participating in this massive global ripple effect. A storm in one hemisphere can literally change the cost of a household item in another. There's no way around it, and today we are going to decode exactly how that happens. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Supply and demand dynamics. 2. Global markets and currency. 3. Decoding data and reports. 4. Macroeconomics and geopolitics. And finally, number 5, hedging against price risk. We're going from massive global concepts right down to specific business actions.
Section 1, Supply and Demand Dynamics, the bedrock of commodities.
Now, if you're used to analyzing the equity market, you know it's all about studying balance sheets, earnings, and cash flows. But commodities? They're a completely different beast. Their fundamentals rely almost entirely on the pure, raw mechanics of supply and demand. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide. Supply is dictated by what the earth and industry can actually provide. Think extreme weather, or maybe a labor strike in Chile suddenly halting global copper output. Demand, on the other hand, shifts with our evolving society. As economies grow, the need for energy absolutely booms, and consumer lifestyle shifts are huge here. The rise of electric vehicles is actively altering long-term oil demand, just as the shift toward plant-based diets impacts the overall demand for meat.
Section 2, Global Markets and Currency, the Interconnected Web. Because of globalization, no nation can operate in isolation anymore. Countries heavily depend on one another due to comparative cost advantages or just plain resource scarcity. Based on recent data, notice how massive anchors like the USA and China dominate both sides of the ecosystem for commodities like gold and crude oil. For crude oil specifically, the USA, Russia, and Saudi Arabia lead the pack in production, while the USA, China, and India are the top consumers. The economic health of these specific nations literally dictates the flow of commodities worldwide. Now, because all these different countries need to trade with each other, they need a common language, right? And since the post-World War II era, that language has been the US dollar. It's the internationally preferred reserve currency. Almost all major commodities, from crude oil to agriculture, are priced in dollars. So to track this, analysts use the dollar index, or DXY, which measures the US dollar against 6 other major currencies. It is an absolutely crucial barometer for global trade. And there's a fascinating inverse relationship here. Think of it like a giant economic seesaw. When the US dollar strengthens, commodities become heavier, essentially more expensive for foreign buyers using other currencies. And what happens then? Well, global demand drops and prices fall. Conversely, a weaker dollar makes commodities cheaper for the rest of the world, sending demand and prices shooting right up. This global pricing structure trickles down directly to domestic markets. Exchanges like the Chicago Board of Trade for agriculture, NYMX for energy, and the London Metal Exchange for base metals, they set the international benchmarks. If NYMX crude prices shift, it directly impacts local fuel prices and inflation in importing countries, rippling all the way down into domestic exchanges like India's MCX, for example. You simply cannot separate the local from the global. Section 3, Decoding Data and Reports, Tracking the Market. To predict these massive shifts, you need cold, hard data. For agricultural commodities, crop reports giving acreage and yield estimates are vital. But weather reports, they're the ultimate wildcards. A delayed monsoon in India can absolutely devastate rice production. Long-term climate patterns, El Niño or La Niña, can severely disrupt the supply of coffee and soybeans in Brazil. The end result is pretty simple. Higher production estimates crash prices, while lower projections send them skyrocketed. It's a very similar story for energy and metals, but here we look at inventory and production trends. High inventory just sitting around in storage signals an oversupply, which drives prices down. But production, meaning what's actively entering the market, acts as a dramatic lever. If an alliance like OPEC suddenly agrees to cut crude oil output, or global mining activity slows down, that drastically tightens the balance and hikes prices straight up. Section 4, Macroeconomics and Geopolitics, Unseen Forces. I like to think of macroeconomic indicators as massive stones being dropped into the commodity pond, creating waves literally everywhere. If GDP is growing, industries are building, which means high demand for energy and metals. If inflation is rising, investors often panic and push their money into commodities, especially gold, as a safe haven hedge. And central bank interest rates? Well, low rates encourage borrowing, boosting industrial consumption, while high rates can strengthen the currency and suppress those commodity prices.
Alongside the economics, we have to talk about geopolitical impacts. Global trade is incredibly fragile. Sanctions, trade wars, or export bans instantly restrict the flow of essentials. For example, conflicts in the Middle East consistently lead to sudden supply disruptions and sharp increases in crude oil prices. Similarly, the Russia-Ukraine war had a profound impact on the supply of Russian crude oil reaching the world market. These regional events instantly alter global supply chains, bringing immense volatility regardless of what the weather or economic growth is doing.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this all builds together. Hedging against price risk, the business shield.
So, with all this crazy volatility, the weather, geopolitics, currency swings, how does a real business actually survive and plan its budgets? They use hedging, basically taking an opposite position in the futures market to offset potential losses in the physical market. Imagine an airline, right? Their biggest unpredictable cost is jet fuel. To survive, they can buy crude oil futures to lock in their fuel costs months in advance. If oil prices suddenly skyrocket due to a geopolitical event, they're protected. Similarly, a farmer can sell wheat futures before harvest, ensuring a stable, predictable income even if global inventories spike and prices crash.
But you can't just guess how much protection you need. It requires a precise calculation known as the hedge ratio. The hedge ratio is the exact proportion of a business's physical market exposure that needs to be covered by derivative instruments to effectively manage their risk. Let's look at how beautifully precise this gets in a practical scenario. Say ABC Company manufactures copper wires and requires 500 metric tons of copper every single month. Because spot prices and futures prices don't always move identically, the company looks at the standard deviation of both prices and their correlation. By plugging these into the formula, ABC Company determines their hedge ratio is 0.915. Practically, this means for every 100 metric tons of copper risk, they need to hedge 91.5 metric tons. So the crucial point is, the math gives them a definitive answer, exactly 37 contracts. Because a standard copper contract on their exchange is 2.5 metric tons, dividing their required 91.5 metric tons by 2.5 tells ABC Company they need precisely 37 contracts to act as their shield. It's not guesswork, it's a highly calculated risk management strategy to ensure their profit margins survive the absolute chaos of global supply and demand.
Of course, hedging isn't a magic wand. The primary advantage is undeniable risk reduction. It acts as insurance, providing vital stability to earnings and cash flow so a company can actually focus on its core operations. But the disadvantages are very real. Futures require margin costs, and options require premium payments, and that eats straight into profitability. Furthermore, if market prices happen to move favorably, your hedge actually prevents you from cashing in on those unexpected gains. Plus, as we just saw with the math, it requires highly specialized knowledge to execute correctly.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from global benchmarks all the way down to the exact math of hedging. But I want to leave you with a final question to ponder. As we look to the future, how will accelerating climate change and disruptive new technologies like electric vehicles fundamentally redefine these commodity markets tomorrow? The bedrock of supply and demand remains, for sure, but the variables, they are shifting faster than ever. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.